Speaking of confusion, what the hell happened with Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, in that recent dash to Washington and back? I mean, no one really knows why he went. It's been reported part of the reason was to pave the way for an actual meeting between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump. Well, if that's the reason, why doesn't someone just tell us that? I mean, it'd be simple for the Prime Minister to come out and say, OK, that's what it was all about. Joining me now, Strategic Analysis Australia Director Peter Jennings. Peter, you're good at reading the tea leaves on these things. Marles met JD Vance and he also met the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, but there's some confusion about what exactly was he doing there. Was it something to do with AUKUS, do we think?
It should have been to do with AUKUS, Steve, but what we've got is the Australian national security clown car here. No one seems to have a clear idea who's steering it or what direction it's going in. The PM now has flatly contradicted the reason that Marles's office has put out, which was that it was supposed to be lining up a meeting for the Prime Minister and the President. Actually, Vice President Vance would be the last person I'd go to try and do that, because he's the one that's hardest on the allies of all of the Trump cabinet. You know, what Marles should have been talking about is how do we come to some sort of understanding with the Americans on the right level of defence spending. They want us to spend 3.5. We're spending just a shade over 2% of gross domestic product. We have differences of views on China, differences of views on Palestine, and I think a deep American sense of uncertainty about are we, Australia, able to deliver on the defence planning to have those nuclear submarines arrive. You know, these are substantive and complex issues, not the sort of thing that you can sort with a 10-minute stand-up conversation. And so Marles, months ago, should have been talking to Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defence, but in a detailed way, you know, behind closed doors, not about photo opportunities. And I think what we've had this time round has just been a sense of panic and no clear understanding about what it is that Richard Marles was supposed to be doing on that trip.
Prime Minister's tried to laugh it off and say, look, you know, what's everybody getting upset about? It was, you know, we had our Deputy Prime Minister speaking to the Vice President of the United States. It's no big deal. But it is a big deal because Hegseth is the guy who's going to be saying very firmly to us, I presume, Peter, listen, you guys, we said you need to spend more on defence. If you're not going to spend more on defence, how are we going to pull this AUKUS thing off? How are we going to convince Americans? How are we going to convince Democrats and Republicans who are doubtful about this AUKUS thing anyway that you guys are all in on it?
Absolutely, Steve. I mean, the Americans have been flagging their concerns for months. Marles first heard this from Pete Hegseth in Singapore 3 months ago. It seems to me we've been hearing constantly from the government there's nothing to worry about. But this trip to Washington, D.C. tells me that there is something to worry about. And then the other thing the PM did today was to say, well, Marles wasn't really there to talk about lining up a visit with him and Trump. So he's contradicting what is coming out of the Deputy Prime Minister's office. It's just a hot mess. And note that in all of this, we've not seen Richard Marles come out in the last 24, 36 hours, Steve, to give his version of what was going on. For a guy that likes to put himself in front of the cameras, he's been avoiding explaining that. And it just makes the whole thing look what I think it is, which is uncoordinated, unplanned, a bit chaotic and rather panicky.
Peter, I nearly drove off the road today, which is dangerous given the weather in Melbourne, but I heard on the radio that Bob Carr, former Foreign Minister and New South Wales Premier, who I know pretty well, and Daniel Andrews, who I know less well, former Premier of Victoria, are going to be esteemed guests at a military parade in Tiananmen Square, along with Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un from North Korea, and, of course, President Xi. What are these two thinking?
There's another guest, Steve, which I checked on before coming to the show, which is that the President of Iran, Mahmoud Pezeshkian, is going to be there as well.
What?
So it's the modern axis of evil: China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea, effectively the authoritarian enemies of our democracies, all at a military parade which is designed to sort of highlight the strength of Chinese military power and their nasty friends. So why is it that Bob Carr and Dan Andrews want to be a part of that? They should be careful that they're not going to be judged by the friends they keep. I think this is something that they should both reconsider because it's going to do damage to their domestic reputations.
Well, Bob said, as if this was going to make it any better, he said, I'm paying my own way to get there. And there was some strange justification that it's celebrating the end of the Chinese-Japanese war. I mean, seriously, as you said, it's a gathering of the bad guys, and these two are going to be paraded around there in some form as saying, look, you know, we're not that bad after all, look who's turned up.
Well, and I read the parade is also going to highlight a whole bunch of new missiles which the Chinese are developing. So there's a historical hook, but it's always got a contemporary point, and this is to actually show the effective Chinese military power right now and the strength of their alliance with other authoritarian countries. It's a very bad look. I mean, there is no justification for an Australian political leader to be going to something like that.
Peter, thank you very much. It was good to catch up with you on our Friday night program.